All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mike and Raven podcast. This is episode 120. Now, this is different because we're going back and forth between miniseries. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was episode 119, of course. That was volume 6 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's emergency service unit with retired NYPD Inspector Ron Wasson, who actually ran the unit for a little while. So it was interesting to hear about Ron's journey being, of course, an emergency service, starting out as a patrolman in Brooklyn when it was really crazy in the 1980s, but then going to ESU and his experiences there. It was a fun episode. The time flew by. He was a blast to talk to. So we go from the E-Men now over to another miniseries today with volume 7 of the Best of the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY elite, with my next guest who served 20 years in the thick of it all. Hot and heavy rescues in New York City. He was there. Joined the Bravest in 1984. He'd go on, to serve 20 years responding to emergencies both at home in New York City and other parts of the country too, as a member of New York's FEMA task force. A responder to both the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and the events of September 11th. He considers himself very fortunate to have survived, but he's turned his trauma and his horrendous experiences from that day into really a wonderful purpose. He's a speaker currently assigned, I should say, to Eagle Rise speakers, talking about his experiences that day and just the heroism of the fire service done before that day and, of course, on that day. And for volume 7 of the Best of the Bravest, it's a pleasure to welcome Tim Brown on the Mike and Raven podcast. Tim, welcome. How are you?
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you being here. So first question is an easy one. Where'd you grow up?
Grew up in Newington, Connecticut.
Okay.
Yeah, Connecticut boy. I barely graduated high school there and went to University of New Haven for fire science. That was kind of the very beginning of the fire science program back then. I had Fred Mercilliat was a New York City fire marshal at the time, and he was one of the lead instructors up in New Haven. So I kind of learned from Fred, and I was the first live-in fire science student at the West Haven downtown firehouse in 1980, I think. So a long time ago. So I spent about 3.5 years there in West Haven. And I left there because I got offered the opportunity to be a paid firefighter in New Britain, Connecticut. So I did 1.5 years in New Britain, and then I got the greatest letter any firefighter ever would get, inviting me to become a New York City firefighter in mid 1984. So I was in the first class of the new list, the list 1164. I was in the top 60 people on a 10,000 person list. And I was able to get into the first class in July. And by September 1st, I was a fireman in Engine 73 in Hunts Point in the South Bronx.
So I already know this is going to be a great conversation because, I got another Connecticut guy here, me, New Haven, you, Newington. So a couple of 203 guys and 860 guys
that's
talking here. So there we go. I already know this is going to be awesome. So, it's funny getting to the FDNY in 84, and what a heck of a place to start out in the South Bronx, of course. Guys with prior experience in other fire departments, some guys like that because, okay, you're not green. Some guys are like, okay, now we got to retrain you on everything because that's your way of doing it over there, but this is the New York way to do it. Was that what you found in your first firehouse?
Yes, the answer is B. They didn't want me to know anything, and anytime I opened my mouth, they were all over me about it. My first fire was what we would call an outside rubbish fire in New York, but it really was what was left of a one-story taxpayer building that had hundreds of fires in it. But somebody torched it up again, and we weren't going into the building, but it was a pretty big fire. And so they put me on the nozzle, and the chauffeur, the MPO, a senior man, Phil Scazzarella, who later became one of my very best friends in life, said, not to me, but to the other guys, he's like, watch this. And he turned the pressure up on the hose to about twice what it should be. And when I opened the nozzle, I went flying across the street. And so they thought that was pretty funny. I didn't think it was so funny myself, but that's how it went on in the beginning for a while until we really bonded strongly. And they didn't do it out of malice. They did it out of being jokers and funny and welcome to the club kind of thing. And so, I mean, we were very, very busy back then. We were like the tail end of the war years of the 70s. The buildings in the 70s, in the beginning of the war years, were occupied buildings. Now, when I got there in the 80s, a lot of it was vacant, multiple dwellings, 6-story, multiple dwellings, over and over and over and over, fires, crazy. And, but most of them were vacant, but let's say every 5 or 7, we would get something happening in an occupied building, with, kids on the fire escape and, people jumping out the windows. One of my first fires, well, certainly my first fatal fire in 1985, we lost the captain from our ladder company, Ladder 42, Captain McDonnell. And the fire was at the change of tour at 9 a.m. across the street from the firehouse. And we knew all the people that lived in this building. They were our neighbors. And there were lots and lots of kids in this building who were our friends. They hung out at the firehouse all the time. But at 9 o'clock, they were banging on the front door of the firehouse. And at the same time, the alarm goes off in the firehouse, and pretty much the building right across the street from the firehouse, smoke was pushing out 2 windows and people were screaming, and things got very confusing because we were change of tours. So we had double the amount of guys, we had double the officers. And of course, every one of us who was there was throwing on our gear and going into the building. And so there was some confusion, and we had a problem getting water. And the inside team, Captain McDonnell, Pete Biefeld, God rest his soul, and Danny Saida and Captain McDonnell were the inside team. They went in to search the fire apartment. I was sitting at the door. I was the backup. Pete Duran was on the nozzle. And the first guy out, Danny Saida, comes out on all 4s, doing the fastest crawl you could ever do. And his, everything was melting. His helmet was melted. And then 5 seconds later, Pete Biefeld, who was the irons, came out horizontal through the air, jumped out, comes out through the fire, and all the skin was hanging off of his ears. Everywhere that wasn't protected, he was burned. All the skin was hanging off. Luckily, he was wearing his face piece, and he was screaming through his face piece. He's still in there. He's still in there. I couldn't get him. The captain's still in there. When Pete landed on top of Pete Duran, 2 Petes, and they tumbled down the stairs together, all of a sudden I was on the nozzle. I was the first guy. And I was like, gotta go. I was just off probation. And so I because of growing up in Connecticut and being a fireman in Connecticut, I had my own bunker gear. I had my own hood, and I was very good at wearing stuff and protecting myself. I was very good with a mask on. And so I just crawled down that hallway as far as I could get. And I just kept getting closer and closer to the floor as the heat was smacking me in the back of the head and burning through my hood. And I got as far as I could, and I couldn't find him. And I realized everybody was coming in behind me. And I said, when this thing flashes over, I'm the one that's not going to get out, because I'm the one deepest into the apartment. And so I turned around to yell, get out. And when I turned to my left, something hit my face piece. And I reached up, and it was the nozzle of the 1 3/4 line that we had finally gotten water in. And so the line was hard. I knew we had water. I took the nozzle and I went crazy knocking this fire down. Because of the confusion, someone yelled over the radio, "The captain's out. We got him. He's safe. The captain's out." And so I was out of air, and I backed out of the apartment. And a couple of minutes later, all the guys from rescue went running into the apartment because they found a captain unconscious on the floor. The confusion was Captain Bowes from Engine 73 was also there, and someone saw the captain and said he was out, but they saw Captain Bowes. They didn't see Captain McDonnell. So McDonnell was still in the fire apartment burning after I gave up the nozzle, and we took him out. He lived a few days, but he was burned very, very badly. And that was my first very terrible experience as a South Bronx fireman. That's, Patty Brown, one of my best friends, Captain Patty Brown, used to say, "You can do everything right in this job and still get killed." That's how dangerous the job is. So that was one of my first very terrible experiences as a young fireman in the 80s in Hunts Point in the South Bronx.
I'm sorry, Tim. That's terrible. I remember Kevin O'Rourke, Rescue 2, and the Bravest, and another guy we lost on 9/11, saying something similar, in that you could have all the senior guys on the scene. You could be, as you just said, doing everything right, but there's just circumstances, certain ones at least, that are just out of your control. You go down to the headquarters in Brooklyn, and for as great as the job is, and it is a great job, which is why I love talking to you guys and having family that are firemen even more so. It's a job that if you look at that memorial wall, it's you might get on that rig, you might not come home. And
for real.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and if you're not thinking about that, well, then you're not being honest with yourself. So, you're not green, but nonetheless, this is a terrible loss of what I'm sure was a great guy and a great fire officer in the firehouse. How did you guys band together and try to heal from this loss?
Yeah, it was difficult. He was covering, so he wasn't really, our guy. He was just there for the day. And we didn't really, know him that well. But the company that he came from as a lieutenant, and as a fireman, they came to our side to help us, and because they knew him better than we did. But for me personally, it was difficult because some guys are relentless in the firehouse, man. And, some guys let it be known that they thought I killed him by opening the nozzle and putting the fire out and saying to me, "You steamed him to death. You didn't have to do that. Why did you open the nozzle up?" And there was a lot of rivalry back then between the truck and the engine where I worked. And guys would say anything, but I was a young guy and impressionable, and I took that to heart, and I questioned myself. I questioned my actions. I felt horribly guilty. But in the end, now 20 years later, I can look back on it and said I did the best I could do, and I did what I knew to do. And the only way we were going to get to him was by putting the fire out. He was in the fire. So, if an experienced South Bronx fireman like Pete Biefeld can't get him, or Danny Saida can't get him without the assistance of water, then not too many people are going to be able to get him out. I mean, he was in the fire, the poor guy. So, I mean, this is what we call experience. And experience is a harsh teacher. Experience is devastating sometimes,
Absolutely.
That's how we learn. And I wish that going back, I could change some things for sure. I wish I didn't have the visions, some of the visions that I have that are burned into my memory forever. But you know what, Mike, that's what we do. That's we signed up for this kind of work: police, fire, EMS, military. And we've chosen to take this on, and we have to have shoulders that are big enough and strong enough to be able to handle it, and then be able to talk about it, and you know, I talk about this stuff a lot. I'm the opposite of most people. I think I, for whatever reason, have the gift to be able to verbalize it. Is it hard to do? It's terribly hard to do. Is it emotionally devastating? Absolutely. But we have to talk about it. I have a niece, Taylor, and a nephew, Mitchell. Taylor is a firefighter in Providence, Rhode Island, and Mitch is a firefighter in Wilmington, Delaware. And if I don't talk to them about my experiences, how are they going to learn? Right? It's my job to pass it along to them and to help them and teach them different skills and different sayings and thoughts and simple things, Mike, like when you put that mask on your face, in through your nose, out through your mouth, slow your breathing down, preserve your air. It's one of the most important safety messages you could ever give to young firefighters. If you can control your mind in these terrible situations, that means you can control your breathing, which gives you more time inside to try and help someone or to put the fire out. And it gives you more time to get yourself out. When your alarm goes off for low air, that should be an immediate indication to you to slow your breathing down. Practice, practice, practice. Ingrain it in your mind that this is how you will stay alive in these bad situations. And when I was an instructor with the Connecticut State Fire School, I felt it was the thing I was most passionate about, was teaching firefighters how to use their air properly and how to breathe slowly and put them in challenging situations and trap them and see how they handle it with regard to breathing slowly and controlling your mind. So like things like that are gold to a firefighter.
Tim Brown's our guest here in the Mike Maven podcast. This is volume 7 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. We're happy that he's here. And I believe in the military, it's referred to as combat breathing, to slowing it down, getting in sync mentally so that you don't exhaust all of it. And I think that, unfortunately, listen, do we wish that these incidents happen? No, we wish the captain could have retired after a nice long career and enjoyed the rest of his life. But in these situations where these line of duty deaths, both in the police department, both in the fire department, happen, if that person could speak to you, generally speaking, what they would probably tell you is learn from this so that this doesn't happen to the next guy or the next gal, and that they don't have to endure the same fate that I did, because we saw that, I'm sure, with that fire. There was the rescue rope tragedy, I believe, a year later in 1985, where 2 firefighters from Rescue 3, if I'm not mistaken, were killed. You had the Watch Street fire in 1994, in which 3 firemen were killed. And each thing, like I said, we wish they were all still here. But the minimum that you can do is try to learn from it and make sure that it doesn't happen again, or at least the chances of it are significantly lessened. And so I think it plays perfectly into what I wanted to ask you about drilling. There's building inspection, for example, and no building in New York City is the same. I mean, an amateur like myself could look at it and say, oh, that's a this, that's a that, but there's so much inside the building that you don't know about unless you work in that industry or unless you're a first responder. So as far as something like building inspection, or as far as just general life-saving drills in the firehouse, tell me about some of the more important lessons you learned, and obviously how often you would do it in the firehouse.
Yeah, I mean, in those early years, for me, my early years in the mid 80s, would be very honest and say there wasn't a lot of building inspection going on. We were very busy trying to stay alive. Later on, when things started to slow down, maybe around 1990, we started doing more of that. And of course, we didn't want to do it, and we would try and figure out a reason to go do this or go do that. But we always had a reason, because we were busy, we were running around, there were fires, and so we didn't do a lot of it. But what it brings up in my mind is a story. When I left 73 Engine, I went to Ladder 4 in Times Square. Very different place than the South Bronx, Times Square. You have so many different types of emergencies that occur day to day in an area like Times Square, from shipboard firefighting to subway firefighting to high-rise firefighting to underground disasters, huge water main breaks, huge gas leaks that you would evacuate 500 people or something. So it was just very different. One example, I had a captain named Dave Wooley, God rest his soul, who was also murdered on September 11th, who was a real good guy. He was a Bronx fireman also. He grew up a Bronx fireman. He liked to tease me because he knew I was going to go to Rescue 3. And there's always that rivalry going on. But in truth, we had tremendous respect for each other. And we had a report of a high pressure steam leak in a sub basement of a high-rise building with a worker trapped. We were first due in Ladder 4. And, Tim is the South Bronx aggressive fireman. And so I was put on all my gear, my protective gear. I threw on my face piece. I go into the steam to try and find this guy, thinking this is easy compared to a lot of stuff I've done. Captain Wooley grabs me by the collar, by the scruff of my neck like this, and yanks me back. And he puts a wood hook in my hands, and he yells at because it was very loud. He's like, if this disappears, stop where you're going, stop in your tracks. I was like, okay, Cap. And so I went into the steam again, searching, and I kept the hook out in front of me. And all of a sudden, the hook got really light in my hand. And I pulled it back where I could see it. And the hook was cut in half. And I did what he said. I stopped and I went back the other way. Anyhow, the worker guy got out from the other side. There was a door, he got out, so he was okay. So Captain Wooley's like, Tim, high pressure steam is invisible, and high pressure steam will cut your head off. Like, you cannot go running like that into high pressure steam leak. You have to be really careful. And that's why I gave you the wood hook. So Captain Dave Wooley, who teased me a lot, saved my life that day because of his knowledge of buildings, because of his building inspection, because of his experience in different types of building experience that I didn't have. So getting back to your question about building inspections are how you find these hazards and how you study them and learn from them, right? And that in a place like New York and Midtown, a lot of these buildings are still heated and cooled by high pressure steam, and it will kill you if you're not careful. So you have to know where these buildings are. You have to inspect them. It has to be on the building card. It has to be on what we call the SIDS, so that when you're responding, they read it to you over the air and they put it on their computer in the front of the rig. And so you can see what these hazards are. And the more knowledge we have through these inspections and through these experiences, the safer we can be.
Absolutely. And that intuitiveness is, as you said, life-saving. Because I remember it reminds me of a story Paul Hassagan told, and not on this show, but in a separate interview he did, where he rode with a senior fireman by the name of Mr. Riley. And they were going through a building, and he puts, I think, a metal hook on the roof or something like that to see if it was getting warmer. And he says to the Cap, I don't think we ought to be here, because if it was getting warmer, the indication is we're going to have a flashover. And they exit. As soon as they get out the building, there's the flashover. And had they been there, they would have been incinerated.
Yeah.
But they got out thanks to that intuitiveness. And so
yeah, those spidey senses.
Right.
Like, yeah. Something's
that's sixth
wrong.
sense. Yeah.
Something's wrong. Yeah.
And
I believe it.
Yeah, me too. Follow your gut, and your gut in that instance can allow you to see another day. I wanted to ask about this, and for some reason I never asked any of the FDNY guys I've gotten on, but you mentioned working in Midtown, and obviously you were working during the 80s, and naturally, of course, we think fires, and there's plenty of that as you were talking about, but this is around the time the AIDS epidemic is going on.
Yeah.
And you're doing a lot of EMS runs too. Working during that, take me through what the procedure was and how frightening that was for you personally.
Well, it didn't take the AIDS epidemic for us to realize that, because in the 80s, where we worked in Hunts Point, there was so much sickness and disease there before AIDS that we did the best we could. I mean, I can remember dozens of little black and brown boys and girls who I did mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on without regard for my own safety back then, because to me, saving their life was more important than any of that. And so I would say that we disregarded a lot of the protections we should have heeded better. AIDS certainly brought it to the forefront more, but we're firemen and we do what we need to do to save people's lives. And I guess in that way, you could say we put our own fate in God's hands, and we just take our chances. I mean, we took our chances an awful lot in many different situations. We were just like, you know what, someone needs my help and I'm going to help them, even to my own detriment. In fact, even to my own death, maybe, and that's what Captain McDonnell did in 1985, 86. I think it was 85. And, we knew there were kids in that building and we were going to go get them. So catching something from a child you're trying to save in the order of risk, that's way down the totem pole from a lot of other things, I think.
Makes sense. Of course, you take that oath, and that oath isn't selective to where you say, I'll save this one, not that one. That doesn't work that way.
That's right.
And you live up to it, and that's at any cost. And sometimes, as we were talking about earlier, it can be the greatest cost. On a more lighthearted note, I love the old school FDNY Mac rigs. I wish they were still around. There's more updated equipment now. That's fine, because obviously you want to keep it up to date so that the guys and the gals are safe. But when I look at those old 90s photos of those rigs and 80s photos, those things were beauties. So getting to drive that around, in the instances where you did as a chauffeur, tell me about the fun it was to drive those things. And obviously, of course, the do's and don'ts of a chauffeur.
Any firefighter who tells you they don't feel like a little kid with their fire truck and their lights and sirens is misleading you at best, because it is one of the funnest jobs in the entire fire service. I felt lucky to drive Rescue 3's heavy rescue for years. And I will say that there was nothing more challenging and nothing more fun maybe I've done in my whole life. That's a big rig. It's a big, heavy rig. And your tensions are up, because when rescue is responding to something, that means it's something that's really happening, confirmed. there's kids trapped, there's firemen trapped, it's a bad fire or it's a bad emergency, and people really need your help now. So it's almost like there's an additional sense of urgency as the chauffeur. With that said, if you don't get there safely, you're not going to be able to help anybody. So you have to kind of walk that very fine line of having your foot full down on the accelerator, but being ready to avoid or stop. We had a fire one morning in the East Bronx, and we were taking up from that. And there was a fire back more on the west side where our firehouse was. In fact, right near Rescue 3's firehouse. But we were way out in the East Bronx. And there were already firemen trapped, and they were screaming for us to get there. And so it was a long drive across Pelham Parkway with an electronic siren, a federal Q siren, and basically the officer with his foot on the air horn the whole way across Pelham Parkway. We were big and we were loud. But when we came across like a 6-lane parkway kind of, and I had the red light, but I'm, here I'm gambling a little bit. We were very, very big. We were very loud. And I was watching on both sides, the traffic coming across. But there was a car on the left side that was behind the truck that I didn't see, and she didn't hear us. And she pulled out right in front. She had a green light. She just didn't hear us as loud as we were. And she pulled out into the intersection right in front of me. And I mean, we were tooling, we were doing 35. I slowed down a lot, but we were still doing 30, 35 miles an hour. And we would have killed her instantly. And for whatever reason, I had learned from one of the 73 engine MPOs, Mike Capt, that even in the worst situation, your hands on the wheels need to be soft, not tight, soft hands. Because then you're not stressed out and you're not going to jerk the wheel one way or the other, soft hands. And so however I did it, I did soft hands to the right, went around her, and soft hands to the left. And the guys in the back got bounced around a little bit, but I didn't even hit her. It's unbelievable that I didn't hit her and kill her. And we just kept going. It was like, I mean, talk about giving yourself and the officer a heart attack, and the woman a heart attack. But I was able to get around her at the last second. So driving a fire truck can be a lot of fun. It could also be really, really dangerous and really stressful. And the last thing you want to do is kill one of the guys on the truck with you, crash into another fire truck that's coming the other way, because that happens frequently, or killing anyone innocent, like this poor lady, just driving her car and she just didn't hear us, So it's a lot of responsibility. You have to take it very seriously. But then, if you have kids or something, you get to say, Daddy's driving the fire engine tonight, and watch the kids' eyes go like this big, I guess I still do.
I mean, for me, I used to, because my mother, I said this before on the show, my mom used to work for the city of New Haven at City Hall for years. And so she got to know a lot of the police and firefighters here and where I'm at. And one of my favorite memories as a kid was sitting in that fire truck, as a 2 or 3-year-old. They put me in the truck and you see the magnitude of the vehicle. And I don't care if you're 2 like I was or 92, it is an eye opener when you sit in there and you realize just how big it is. And this Hasagen did say to me on this show, it's not how fast can you go, how fast can you stop? Because it has a governor on it. Most of them do, at least, to where I think the max on a rig like that is 54, 55, he was telling me. But nonetheless, when you're barreling down in very narrow streets in some cases with all that traffic, how fast can you stop is what makes or breaks a chauffeur. And you demonstrated it there to where I guess, now I can get to 93, which was, I mean, listen, this, as I have a mini series profiling the guys from the NYPD bomb squad as well. And they were busy during the 70s and 80s because there were bombs all over the place. So that was domestic terror, but this is the first instance of foreign terror. And I've explained this before, but for those of you that haven't listened to the bomb squad interviews, I'll just condense it to where Ramzi Youssef allegedly on orders from, not allegedly, no, confirmed, since confirmed, on orders from Osama bin Laden, loads a Ryder truck, with the full of explosives. And him and his cohorts go park it underneath the North Tower in the parking garage of the North Tower. They light a fuse, they take off running, they go somewhere so they could watch the end result. The bomb detonates, 6 people, including a pregnant woman and her unborn child, are murdered, and thousands are injured. And thankfully, they were able to escape, although they were hurt, they didn't die. And we're grateful for that. And Tim, you were one of the many people that were there for something that wound up with a severe injury, and that's Kevin Shea from Rescue One, the poor guy who lived, thank God, but fell down 40 feet into that very crater. So from your angle, being there, looking at the damage, trying to get these people out from the top floors, take me through getting the call, getting down there, and how your company handled it.
Yeah, we had a busy night the night before up in the Bronx, and I live in the east side of Midtown East in Manhattan, and I had taken to riding my bicycle to and from work. And so I rode home that morning, but I was pretty beat up, pretty smoked out, and all I wanted to do was take a shower and go to bed. And so I jumped in the shower. I had the scanner on in the other room. And so when I came out of the shower, I heard all this screaming and fifth alarm and this and that. And I realized that it was the World Trade Center. So I had my gear with me, and no, I did not have my gear with me. I had my uniform stuff with me. So I threw all that smoky stuff, I put it back on, and I jumped in the subway and I went downtown. I was off duty. And I went to the chief and I said, I'm Tim Brown. I'm special operations rescue trained. How can I help? And he said, well, one of your buddies is down a hole. You can go try and help those guys. So I borrowed some gear and I went toward the area where the hole was, where the explosion had ripped 5 floors apart, where Kevin had fallen down. And by the time I got over there, they were already effecting the rescue of him, and they didn't need my help. So I wound up climbing the North Tower, 110 floors, in a pretty heavy smoke condition, because all those cars that were in the car garage underneath, they were all on fire, putting out this black, oily, heavy smoke. And so I wanted to make sure there weren't people trapped in the stairwells or on the floors themselves. So I was pretty healthy and in pretty good shape back then. And so I was able to do the 110 floors all the way up to check the stairwell and send people down and make sure people were okay. So, I mean, that was really the extent of my day there. I didn't get involved in the rescue of Kevin. And Kevin and I went to Proby school together. I knew him, right from the beginning of my career in the fire service of New York. So he's still my friend to this day. And I'm glad that he is living a healthy and happy life, because things really could have turned out very differently for him.
Yeah. And he had been involved in the infamous roof rope rescue with Patty Brown a couple of years prior. That if you, for my listeners, if you want to watch that on YouTube, I'll link it in the description. That is a legendary, like legit iconic rescue in FDNY history that was effected, that Kevin had a big role in. Because I remember Hank Millay from Rescue One, he's a friend of mine. He was the chauffeur that day. I got to make it up to it, because last time I said it, I got the chauffeur wrong. I said it was the late Gary Guidell. So Hank, I know it was you. I'm sorry. You were the chauffeur that day.
Tell him I said hello. I love Hank.
Yeah, he's a great guy. The senior dude, as the guys on Getting Salty jokingly
Yeah,
call him. He's a wonderful man, and it was good to have him on the show. And he drove down there that thing, and I remember asking him. I said, about being in the garage and whatnot. I says, Mike, it was. He felt like it was a no impact day, as he described it, because
yeah,
the conditions were so murky, and the radios didn't work, to where it was chaotic. Because think about it, I know there's federal agencies involved, and that's a different story because that ended up being a federal probe, obviously, because it was a terrorist attack. And if you want, go back to my bomb squad interviews, you'll hear about it with the guys that I interviewed from the unit. But you have on the surface the FDNY, the NYPD, and the Port Authority Police, which has jurisdiction over the entire complex, still does to this day. And now they can communicate all these years later, thank God. But at the time, they can't. So whatever PAPD found out, they can't tell the FDNY, and the FDNY can't talk to the NYPD, which was difficult. So, we'll dive deeper into how that changed operations in a moment. But first, Rescue 3. There's a lot of characters in the firehouse, both funny and legendary. When you were in Rescue 3, take me through some of the shenanigans of the funny kind that were played in the firehouse, and some of the great guys you worked with. I'd love to learn more about it.
I worked with some of the greatest firemen in the world. I feel very lucky and very blessed to have been able to be a part of it and to learn from many of the senior guys. A gentleman, and I say a gentleman because Rescue 3 is known as the Gentleman's Rescue. The greatest gentleman, senior man for my first year or two was Conrad Tinney. And we didn't even really call him Connie. Everyone called him Mr. Tinney because we had that much respect for him as a firefighter and as a human. He's another Connecticut guy. Mr. Tinney taught through tough love with a good heart. If you did something wrong, he would teach you with love, not with intimidation or talking down to you or something, because he really wanted you to be a better firefighter, sincerely in his heart. He was one of the most amazing firefighters I ever worked with, as a very senior man to me. Guys more of my generation, I had a group of guys who were amazing firefighters who didn't take the politics of the job or maybe the rules so seriously. And so we used to call ourselves the regular guys, like that, because we were just regular guys. We weren't looking to pin medals on our chests or do anything like that. We just wanted to help make the situation better, save lives if we could, along the way. Pete Romeo, Sam Malisi, Danny McDonough, Chris Blackwell. I can go down the list over and over and over of all these amazing firefighters. One of the bravest things I ever witnessed with my own eyes was a fire. It had to be December or January. It was in the snow, and it was a taxpayer fire, a one-story commercial building. And we got in very quickly. We were like second due truck or something. And I'm driving, and the chauffeurs are supposed to bring the second saw to the roof. But it didn't look that bad. I was like, okay, let me go up and pull roof. And if I need the saw, I'll go back and down and get it. So I got up there, the fire got worse. I should have brought it with me the first time. So I'm going back down the ground ladder to go back to our truck to get the power saw. And I'm right below the rooftop level. And there's a hose, I think it was 46 engine. There was a hose into the building, into the taxpayer. They were fighting the fire. And if you've ever been in fires like this, sometimes the whole drop down ceiling assembly collapses at once because the fire in that space destroys it quickly, and it just lets go all at once. And what happens is the whole front of the store turns to fire in an instant, because all that fire that was in the cock loft now is drawn down into the front of the store. So I'm on the ladder and this happens, the ceiling assembly collapses. And the whole store in an instant is fire from the ground to the top. And you can see the 2.5-inch line going into it. So what does that mean? That means you've got 4 guys inside that fire on that hose line. And before I could even get the words Mayday out of my mouth onto the radio, Sam Malisi from Rescue 3 dives into the fire. And the next thing I see is 4 engine firefighters being thrown out of the flames. And then Sammy dives out. And I witnessed this, Mike, and my jaw's on the floor. I can hardly speak from what I just saw. And not only could I get the words out of my mouth, I couldn't even take the action that fast that Sam took. Like he just sprung into action and yanked those guys right out of the fire. And we got back to the rig and I was like, Sam, like, holy crap. And Sam was like, it was nothing. He's like, they were right there. I knew where they were. I just got them out. I was like, no. I just watched you dive into fire and throw these guys out and save the, in my opinion, he would not agree with me, but in my opinion, he saved all their lives. And nobody even really knew it. I just happened to be there and saw this act of heroism unfold right in front of me. So I think in my whole career, that is one of the most bravest, most heroic things I've ever seen, with the exception of September 11th, I have to say.
And that's what I love about it, is that these guys, they don't view it as anything other than just doing their job. They don't want, the epitome of a good deed is not expecting anything in return for it.
Right.
I remember George Steinbrenner saying one time, if you do something good for somebody, or in this case, multiple people, and anybody beyond God, you, and the people you did it for know about it, you're not doing it for the right reasons. And if you ask somebody about that, oh yeah, it was a good job. Just a simple description like that, where no, you saved their lives, to where that's why it is a special breed. And I hate to sound, grovelly and sentimental and sappy, but it is true. For as cliche as it may sound, it is true, because you put me in that situation. I'm like, well, it's been nice knowing everybody. I'm on my way out. But no, in that instance, diving into fire. Yeah. There's nothing I can add to that can epitomize any further what you just described, the heroic efforts.
I mean, if someone told me that story, I might be like, what? But
that's my reaction.
Yeah, I saw it happen. I saw it happen with my own eyes. I saw exactly what he did, and it's breathtaking, really.
And that's why they're called New York's bravest.
Yeah.
So 1998. Now, there had been, as our friend Hank explained, there had been precursors to SOC. There used to be something called 13 David, which they would go out to fires and they would say, okay, here's what we have, here's what you guys are going to need, and other forms, I'm sure, before that. But 98 is interesting because the late, great Chief Downey, who, FEMA, if he was still around, he'd love what FEMA has become, because he was the chief orchestrator of it. He goes to Commissioner Von Essen and he says, can we have squads? And of course, listen, it's Ray Downey. You're not going to say no to Ray Downey. Von Essen says, sure. And we get 288, 252, 41, 1, I believe, and I'm missing 1, 61. So those go from engines into squads. And now, in addition to the rescue companies that we have, like Collapse Rescue, and obviously the rescues 1 through 5, we have these companies that are engine companies on their face, but also carry specialized tools to further help at the scene of the major emergency. So By this point, you got 14 years on the job, but nonetheless, it's pretty exciting because now you can use your abilities to an even greater extent. How excited, how excited were the guys in Rescue 3 to have additional backup? Because yeah, can they handle a major emergency on their own? Sure, but the more the merrier.
Yeah, and well, I mean, it makes sense what Chief Downey's idea was, and what he was able to get done for us. You always want more experienced guys coming, right? Even if we are the most experienced guys in the rescue company, we're going to get jammed up sometimes too. And I'll tell you, we had a fire in Washington Heights. This is, well, it's right around there, right around 98, I guess. Very, very bad fire, and it was top floor. There were people trapped. It was in several apartments already. It was in the cock loft. Those buildings in Washington Heights, huge apartment buildings. And this fire it was, I think by the time we got there, was the third alarm already. And so I was up on the roof, cutting the roof, and the mayday started occurring. And with each mayday, I knew how more imperative it was that we get the roof open. So it's not mayday, mayday, okay, everybody off the roof. It's mayday, mayday, you better stay on the roof and cut the roof and put on your big boy pants now. Even my captain, the captain of Rescue 3, a very experienced fire officer, gave a mayday himself. But I knew that our position was the roof, our responsibility was the roof, and opening the roof was critical to solving these maydays. And a lot of the firefighters on the roof decided it was time to get off. The only guy that stayed on the roof with me was a guy from Squad 41. And he stayed with me the whole time, and we opened up a lot of that roof. And I believe we helped to solve some of those maydays. So I am so grateful for the squads. I think having 6 more rescue trained, highly motivated firefighters at the fire scene with us is tremendously comforting and tremendously helpful. And I looked forward to working with those guys all the time. And also the brilliance of it is that the squad guys can work in the rescue companies, and the rescue company guys can work in the squad companies. So you get to know each other, you get to rely on each other, and you get experience from both sides of it, So I really think the way FDNY SOC is set up right now is the correct way. You're getting a lot more motivated, experienced firefighters coming to the scene of an expanding fire or emergency. And then that's what you need.
And there have been many crises that have been averted thanks to the presence of these squads and the work that they've done, in addition to supplementing the work of the rescue companies. And what's better about that is that they may be based in different parts of the city, but they can respond citywide to anything: building collapses, major fires, major construction accidents, to where I think I saw a video, because if you haven't determined this already, and we're talking with Tim Brown here on the Mike the Raven podcast, this is volume 7 of the Best of the Bravest. I'm a buff with the capital B. So, I saw a video on YouTube where I think Rescue 1 was on a separate call and they were unavailable because they were at that call. Squad 288 was acting as Rescue 1, all the way from Maspeth out in Queens, coming into Manhattan, handling the call just fine. I'm like, that is amazing. To where, again, as if Chief Downey wasn't brilliant enough, that further speaks to how well he understood the fire service, to where, like I said, if he was still around, and not that he was a braggadocious guy, he struck me as a very humble man.
Yes.
You could point to that and say, hey, that was a great decision on his part. So
just the other day, Mike, 288 was acting as Rescue 1 again. So that's a regular occurrence, and as it should be.
Mm-hmm. And it's exciting too, because if you're a fireman in a unit like that, not only do you get to really work in a unit that requires a lot of you, which these guys are always up for the challenge. But in addition to that, you get to really own your craft. Are you ever going to perfect it? No, of course not. But you can always learn new things because there's different challenges. The way you fight a fire or respond to an emergency, as you well know, I don't have to tell you this, in Manhattan is different from how you work it in the Bronx or Queens or Staten Island. And especially for young guys, which is what a lot of the guys in SOC were at the time, some of them obviously very experienced, but some of them really young, they had to be like kids in a candy shop, and even if you were a little bit more experienced, still same thing. And so that does bring us to that morning. We just hit the 20-year mark of your position was unique in that by this point you had gone to OEM, which for my listeners that are not familiar with New York City, that stands for Office of Emergency Management. The Giuliani administration had established that in the mid-90s, I believe, following the 93 World Trade Center bombing, and its position was 7 World Trade Center. Some people say, well, why would you put it there? But that's not for this podcast to discuss. It's, some other podcasts can discuss that if they would like. So first, before the morning itself and the rescue response, what made you go to OEM?
A number of things. I had done just under 7 years in Rescue 3. I had become best friends with a legend named Captain Terry Hatton. And Terry married Beth, who was Mayor Giuliani's assistant. And so Beth and me and Terry were very close. And therefore I was kind of in that Giuliani crowd back then. And they had been asking me to go to OEM for years, and I kept saying no. I'm very happy in Rescue 3, but finally it was time for me to make a move, and I kind of hung up my boots, my helmet, and I put on a tie, and I went to work for Mayor Giuliani, which was a great honor. And I helped develop this OEM concept. With the director and some of the deputy directors and all that. And I think we were very effective in what we were trying to do, which was bring the office of the mayor to the scene of major disasters and emergencies in New York City to ensure proper coordination and resources for the customer, right? The customer is the people who are in trouble. And it was our job to ensure that the city was doing their very best to mitigate things like major water leaks or water main breaks, which would involve 17, 20, 25 agencies. So, we were rarely the incident commander, but we were frequently the incident coordinator and supporting the incident commander with whatever they needed. So I got promoted within that group and supervisor of field operations. And there were about 15 or so of us, cops and firemen, who wore the tie with the mayor's office jacket on. And our office was 7 World Trade, and that's where I was on the morning of September 11th. I think my story is out there a lot, but basically, I was probably one of the first responders into the North Tower that morning. And the things I'd like to talk about are the heroes I saw that day, the heroes who I was the last to see them. These days, a lot of their children are 20, 21, 22, 23 years old. They're old enough where they can begin to ask questions about their father or their mother. And so I now have been gaining more and more of these young people and being able to tell them about their father's or mother's last moments and the heroism they displayed and the courage and bravery they displayed in the last moments of their life. And I believe that's one of the main reasons God didn't take me that day was so that I could talk about these heroes. And I know they knew that they were likely fulfilling their oath that day completely, because they said it to me. I went into the North Tower at the plaza level, which was one level higher than VC Street level.
Austin J. Toba Plaza.
That's exactly right. So I was on the plaza. That's where I entered into the North Tower. There was an escalator there where hundreds of office workers were kind of funneling onto this escalator to go down and go underground to get away, because that's the way the Port Authority police were directing them. Hundreds of people trying to get on this escalator. And Mike, I'll tell you, what you would expect to be happening did not happen. You would expect people to be pushing and screaming and trampling each other, which they were not. They were doing the opposite. For every person who was obese or pregnant or injured or disabled, there were 4 or 5 office workers helping that person. And I said to myself in that moment, no matter what happens to us today, we're going to be okay, because that's the true human spirit. People are good. When someone trips next to us, what does everybody do? They reach their hand out to try and help that person out and check to see if they're okay. And that's exactly what was happening on this escalator on the morning of September 11th, right in front of my eyes. I got on the escalator. I was going down, and as I go down the escalator, the lobby is revealing itself to me. And I chuckled in my head, because I realized in that moment why the cops called us bumblebees. Because when hundreds of us get together with the stripes, the reflective stripes, it looks like a hive. And as that lobby was being revealed to me, I looked out and I said, oh, I get it. It's a hive. We're a hive. There were hundreds of firefighters awaiting their orders to go up. I got to the bottom of the escalator, and right in front of me was a bumblebee. And I looked up at his face, and it was firefighter Chris Blackwell from Rescue 3, who I had worked with, not just in Rescue 3, but on the same shift. So we did everything together. We slept, ate, went to fires, went to emergencies together. Chris was like a blood brother to me. And I love this man with all my heart. Chris was another Connecticut guy. And when he would go home after a long 24 at Rescue 3 in the Bronx, he was a paramedic in his local community. And so all Chris did with his whole life was help other people. If we had a victim, especially a child, from a fire or a car accident or a building collapse, and Chris was working, we always tried to put that patient in Chris's hands, because we knew in his hands gave that person the best chance at life, because Chris was that good. So I get to the bottom of the escalator, and right in front of me is Chris Blackwell. And we always greeted each other the same way. We came face to face. We came to attention. He always had the unlit stub of a cigar in the corner of his mouth to complete his caricature. In a big sweeping motion, he would reach up, grab the cigar out of his mouth, put it down to the side, and we would both lean in and kiss each other on the lips. And then we went back to attention, and he put the cigar back in his mouth. And we did that because we did truly love each other. We also did it because we thought it was very funny watching the reaction of the other firemen when we did it. And so Chris and I did that on the morning of September 11th. And then he said to me, Timmy, this is really bad. And I said, I know, Chris, be careful. I love you. And he said, I love you too. And after he said those words to me, Mike, Timmy, this is really bad, he turned around and he went in the stairwell and he went up. He knew it. He said the words to me. He knew he was fulfilling the oath he took when he became a New York City firefighter. He knew he was likely not coming back down that stairwell, but he did it anyhow. I heard someone yell my name across the bumblebees. Timmy! It's actually recorded on the Naudet brothers film inside the lobby of the North Tower. You can hear Captain Terry Hatton yelling my name. And I ran over to my best friend, the legend, Captain Terrence S. Hatton, who was 6'4", and with his helmet and boots on, was like 6'7", 6'8". He was the captain of Rescue 1, the Manhattan Elite Rescue Company. And he was put there by the leadership of the fire department on purpose. Ray Downey, Bill Feehan, Commissioner Von Essen put Terry there for a reason, because Terry was a thoroughly experienced Rescue 2 fireman. That's where he learned to be a fireman, under Captain Ray Downey. But Terry was also one of those guys who was really smart. And so he was the perfect person to be the captain of Rescue 1. They were grooming him to one day head up special operations and one day become the chief of the entire New York City Fire Department. That's how much the leadership respected Terry. So I ran to my best friend. I'm 6 feet, he's 6'4". So he kind of overwhelms me when we hug. And I wrapped my arms around him. And he squeezed me tight to his chest. His Halligan, and he had his light, and he squeezed me tight to his chest. And he kissed me here on the cheek. And he said in my ear, I love you, brother. I may never see you again. And I blew that comment off. I was just like, yeah, I just kind of brushed it away. But Terry knew what he was talking about. Terry was always 6 steps ahead of everybody else. And Mike, after he said that to me, I love you, brother. I may never see you again. He turned around, and this is on the Naudet film, and he went in the stairwell with his men, the men of Rescue 1, and they went up. And they made it to the 83rd floor of the North Tower, where they got trapped in an early on localized collapse. And I didn't hear this myself, but I was told by other firefighters who survived, who did hear it, that Terry was screaming the worst thing a New York City fireman could ever say or hear. Mayday, 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 Rescue 1 is trapped. Mayday, 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 Rescue 1 is trapped. Because Terry and his men were trapped up on the 83rd floor in a localized collapse. I know that fireman David Weiss from Rescue 1 made it down to the lobby of the North Tower. And he was missing his helmet, and his head was full of blood. And he was begging other firefighters to go back up with him to help get his guys out from Rescue 1. But the evacuation order had already been given, complete evacuation, all FDNY out of the tower by orders of the chief of department. So some firefighters obeyed the command and some disobeyed the command and went back up with David. and they all perished. Along with Terry Hatton, my best friend, and his men from Rescue One. But I didn't hear it on the radio. I had 3 radios. The one in front of me was from emergency management. So I didn't hear Terry yelling. And if I had, I would have been going up those stairs like Patty Brown and the guys from 3 Truck. And I would not have gotten out. So another plane hits the South Tower. We huddle up, the leadership of the city huddles up in the lobby of the North Tower, and it's decided that myself and Assistant Chief Donald Burns would go to the South Tower. And we went to the South Tower. Chief Burns went to the command post. I went to where people were trapped in an elevator in the South Tower. And as you said earlier, I think you said, I don't know if it was Paul or Hank, used the words a no impact event.
Hank.
Yeah. So same thing here with the elevator with me. The people trapped in this elevator needed a real fireman, not a mayor's office guy, because they needed someone with all the gear and with the tools and all that stuff. And it was a pretty horrific sight. People were getting burned and they were trapped. And out of nowhere appears another bumblebee, and I look up at his face, and it's firefighter Michael Lynch from Ladder 4, who I had worked with. And he put his hand, he saw the look in my face, and he saw what was occurring in front of him, which no human should ever see. And he put his hand on my shoulder, and he squeezed my shoulder, and he said to me, "Timmy, I got it." Because he was a fireman, and he had all his gear on, he had tools, and he brought a whole fire truck full of tools with him. And he was already formulating his plan on how he was going to rescue these people. I had to leave that scene because over my radio, confirmed by the FBI, 3rd plane incoming, confirmed by the FBI, impact imminent, take cover, impact imminent, get in the stairwells, take cover. And I said to firefighter Michael Lynch, I have to go. You got this. And so I went to the command post. I tried to call the White House. I couldn't get through. Then I tried to call the Pentagon, and the operator told me the Pentagon was under attack, which is the first we knew of it. But I did talk to New York State Emergency Management, and they assured me that the fighter jets were coming as fast as they could to protect us overhead, because we couldn't do our job and save people if planes kept crashing into us. And so we needed to get fighter jets overhead to protect us. With that confirmed, Chief Burns grabbed me and said, get all these injured people out of the lobby of the South Tower, because they were impeding our evacuation effort. And so I ran out onto Liberty Street. The first thing I saw in the middle of Liberty Street was a fireman who was just killed by a woman who jumped. Another thing no one should ever have to see. Mike Lynch was at his truck, Ladder 4, yelling at me to go help him with the motor for the hearse tool, because it's pretty heavy. And so I started running toward him, but another fireman got there first, and they waved me off. And that's the last time I saw Mike alive. We know that we can prove he saved 2 women out of that elevator. We think he saved 3 with the hearse tool, because the 2 of them identified him positively. The 3rd one wasn't as sure, but thought so, before the whole thing came down and killed everyone. And when I told them where Mike was and where they would find his body, I said, you'll find his body with a hearse tool and with a bunch of people that were trapped in an elevator, because I know I was with him less than 10 minutes before the building came down, probably 5 minutes. So I'm out on Liberty Street trying to find the paramedics. I find them under the pedestrian walkway, the south pedestrian walkway that went across West Street. And myself and Captain Charlie Wells from EMS and 2 other paramedics went running with the stretcher to go back into the South Tower. And we were about 20 feet from the door on the sidewalk with the stretcher when the building collapsed. And it was so loud and so obvious, Mike, that there were no words needed. The first piece of steel snapped, and it was so loud that it echoed through the canyons of Lower Manhattan. And we're trained as firefighters, and we've learned through experience in building collapses that you cannot outrun a collapse. It will always catch up to you. And so I yelled at the paramedics, follow me, and we went right into the Marriott Hotel, which was right there where we were, figuring that I think 47-story building or something would maybe protect us from the collapse of the South Tower. The South Tower collapsed on the Marriott, and now the Marriott was collapsing around us. It was as clear as the room that you're in right now. And with a snap of your fingers, it was pitch black. I was in the lobby of the Marriott Hotel, which was a restaurant called the Tall Ships Restaurant. I hit the ground and started crawling to try and find a vertical column, because I know a vertical column is the strongest part of a building, and we frequently find people alive near a vertical column. Somehow, I believe it was through God's guidance that I found a very large vertical column that I was able to wrap my arms around and hold on to. I compare the noise to being on the tarmac of JFK, surrounded by 747s that are full blast. You couldn't breathe because the dust was so thick that it was caking in your mouth and your eyes and your ears and your nose. And I was trying to hold on. I was trying to stick my face down in my shirt to try and breathe. You couldn't see, you couldn't hear, you couldn't breathe. And the wind had lifted me up. As the hotel was collapsing, all that air was being pushed out, and it was all being pushed out where I was. And so my legs went up in the air. I was holding on to this column with every ounce of my strength. The only way I was able to hold on to this is because God gave me the strength to hold on to it. Because this hurricane was trying to blow me out in the street. But I knew if I left this column, the protection of this big steel vertical column, that I was for sure dead. And the only chance I had was to hold on to this column. And I mean, the thoughts you have at the end of your life, or what you think is the end of your life, you know, basically are, in my case, I just thought it was so unfair that I couldn't hold my family one more time and tell them I love them. And I just waited to be crushed. And just like that, as fast as it started, it stopped, and I was alive. And I was very happy to be alive. And I wanted to live. And so I went into kind of that fright mode where I wanted to get the heck out of there. And I went one way back toward Liberty Street, but the building was collapsed. So there really were no doors or anything. Everything was collapsed. And I came across a truck with the diesel motor running and the headlights on. And I did not recognize it as a fire truck. I don't know what it was to this day, but all I could think of in the moment was that it was a truck bomb, and that they had driven a truck bomb into the building and the bomb was going to go off. And so I went back again the other way, deeper into the Marriott, toward the lobby of the Marriott. And I came across a roll down gate that was down, metal roll down gate that was down. And I put my fingers under it to lift it up because I wanted to keep going that way, away from what I thought was this bomb. And when I lifted it up, all these fingers came from the other side. And we lifted it up, and there were like 15 firefighters and civilians who were trapped on the other side of this metal roll down gate, which I didn't know. And behind them is where the collapse went through. So they were on this ledge between the metal roll down gate and a hole that was 7 stories down. Half the firefighters and civilians that they were with were just killed in the collapse. But these about 15 folks were trapped on this ledge. And I said, I want to go that way. And they said, there is no that way. It's gone. It's 7 stories down. And so we turned around and went back the other way again. And although it was pitch black, there was a fireman coming from the outside. And one of the women up front saw his light. And she started screaming, and he started yelling, "Come to my light, come to my light." And so we all formed the chain, and we were able to get across the rubble and go that way. Anyhow, that's a long story about my survival. I was one of the few who was able to survive and get out, which I'm grateful for. I guess I'll always wonder, why was I chosen to live, and Terry and Patrick and Chris and Michael and Ray and Bill and Pete, all of them were taken. But if I can use my time and my voice to tell of their bravery and their courage and their heroism for future generations, then I will feel that I have lived the life they would be proud of.
I don't even know how to follow that. But what if I can say anything? A couple things. You're doing that right now, because that day, I don't want to say joke, but not to make people feel old, but I was 1 year old on that day, Tim.
Yeah.
I was in diapers, and I always say I was probably in my mom's hands, like, "Mom, why haven't you fed me yet? What's up?"
Yeah.
Not knowing that this was unfolding. And the other thing is, it sounds so cliche, and I don't mean to say, well, they died as they lived, but they did, because Chief Gansey's, what was his last act? He's down there at the base of the building. The mayor had told him, "Come with us." He said, "No, I'm not leaving my men." He directs them out of the building. He's standing in front of the building on the radio, him and Chief Albert Torrey. Torrey thankfully survived. And he stayed down there with Bill Feehan to the very end, and there's Ray Downey, who had told Commissioner Von Essen. I remember Von Essen telling me this on the show. Von Essen's a friend of mine, good guy. And he said, Ray had turned to him and said, "These buildings can come down, Tommy." And Tom said, I don't think he thought that the buildings could come down that quickly, in less than an hour, or in the North Tower's case, less than 2 hours, but that they could come down. But nonetheless, where was Chief Downey with the guys from Ladder 118 in the Marriott? There's the iconic photo of Ladder 118 racing across the Brooklyn Bridge to the towers, helping people. He's a chief of SOC. He doesn't have to be there. He can coordinate the mission from elsewhere. But where is he? Right in the thick of it.
That's right.
As were 23 New York City police officers, as was Keith Roma from the Fire Patrol, 37 Port Authority cops, 3 New York court officers, all of them different agencies, different responsibilities, but all of them shared the tenacity and the true, genuine desire to help their fellow man. Yeah. We can't forget that.
Yeah. It is the biggest lesson of 9/11, I think, is the heroism of these amazing, courageous, brave law enforcement and fire. And that's why I hope I live a very long life so that I can have this voice and that I can tell their stories and that they take their rightful place as legends in the history of this great nation.
I do want to tell a quick funny Bill Feehan story that Len Essen told me. He says, when he became fire commissioner in 96, when Howard Safer went to go run the NYPD, that he was saying that Giuliani had told him the one condition is you got to keep Bill Feehan. And Von Essen says, "You're kidding me? I was going to beg the guy to stay." Of course,
Yeah.
he'll keep Bill Feehan.
Who wouldn't beg him to stay?
Exactly. Yeah.
The consummate professional historian, gentleman, even when it was the painful truth that nobody else had the courage to say the words. Commissioner Feehan had the courage to say the words to my face that other people didn't have the courage to say. And I had so much respect for him for that. And so much love for him as a father figure to me, I guess. This world needs more people like Bill Feehan, I'll tell you that.
And there's a new film on him out called Chief.
Yeah, I watched it yesterday. Yeah,
I got to see it. I haven't. I've been trying to look for it, so hopefully I can find it and watch it. A true legend of not just the FDNY, but the fire service period. Who, again, at 71 years old, did he have to be there? No, he could have been enjoying a nice retirement, but that wasn't him.
Right.
And so I'll accelerate to, and I thank you for sharing your story, because I can never, if it's a small thing, this is a very small thing on my end to repay. But if I can give my NYPD friends a platform to tell these stories, not just of your own experiences, but of the heroes who aren't here to tell their stories, it's an absolute honor to do that. So a lot of guys left after that day. Understandably, they had put their time in. They had just narrowly escaped death. They had lost a bunch of friends, and so they retired. And nobody's going to knock them for that. But there are some guys that stayed because they figured, okay, we've got to rebuild. We've just lost so much experience. SOC was decimated. Everybody that was on duty for Rescue 1 through 5 that day perished. Yeah. And some guys were with different squads. I know P.D. Brennan was riding Rescue 4, I believe, as an example. He was at Squad 288 guy. So we stayed. And then, the FDNY had somewhat kind of stood itself up again, much like a prize fighter who'd been knocked down, was not counted out. You left. I imagine that day had to play a factor in as to why you left. So I'll ask you, had it not been for that day, would you be one of those guys that'd be a 35, 40-year vet?
I always thought that. I always thought that would be my path, but I had already left the firehouse. I was wearing a tie. I was working for the mayor. I was political now. I had left the firehouse in 1998 to work for Mayor Giuliani. After 9/11, and then after Rudy was out of office, I went and worked for the feds for a year and a half. As a New York City fireman, I was a detail to work for Secretary Thompson at Health and Human Services. And then as a representative of Secretary Thompson, I wound up going to Rhode Island to assist Governor Kachiri after the Station nightclub fire, which wound up killing 100 people, because he didn't have strong support from, their emergency management group there then. And unfortunately, I had a lot of experience with dealing with a lot of bodies and a lot of families. So I got very close with Governor Kachiri. I stayed there for over a year with him, helping the state get through that, helping the families get through that. And that was all as a New York City fireman on details. And then in 2004, I had my 20 years and I put my papers in and I got out. And those were the worst years for me, because I didn't have purpose. I didn't have mission. I didn't see a future. So for me, those were the hardest years. But then in 2007, 2008, I got back with Mayor Giuliani, and I started doing a lot more work with the 9/11 families, which gave me mission and purpose, which grew into bigger things. And so now I've been with the Department of Defense for 10 years, specifically part of the team that's prosecuting the 5 terrorists who planned September 11th. So my mission and my purpose is very strong now. I want to see this through, and then we'll see what happens after that. We'll see what God's plan is for the rest of my years.
Well, keep up the great work on that. And I remember John Miller telling me, and he of course, it was the 100th episode. For those of you that haven't watched it, I highly suggest you do. He's currently the NYPD Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Public Information. As you may remember, he interviewed bin Laden in '98, and you bringing up that trial of the 5 terrorists, which I imagine includes Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, brought that back to mind, because he says, when he said what bin Laden said in that interview about declaring war on America, about a black day for the United States, I asked John, I said, here we are 20 years after that day, 10 years after he got killed by SEAL Team 6. Knowing you were the last reporter to talk to him, how does that make you feel? And he says, remembering the friends he lost on that day, he talks about the resilience. And if you look at what the FDNY is now and what the NYPD is now, with a world-class counterterrorism operation, the FDNY has a world-class counterterrorism operation. Do we wish this happened? Of course not. I would love to go to New York City right now and see the Twin Towers. I would love it if, we can go to Rescue 1, and Terry Hatton's there after a nice long career that he enjoyed and retired. He's going back and visiting Rescue 1. We would love that. So for as much as we wish this didn't happen, if any silver lining is going to come out of this, it's that we have at least rebounded. And like I said earlier, in regards to the prize fighter, we were on our back for a while. Yes, we were hit very hard, but we got up. And here we are, and that if that isn't a testament to the human spirit, the New York spirit, the never say die attitude, I don't know what is.
I agree with everything you said.
And that brings us now, and this has been a conversation, my friend, to a lighthearted segment called Rapid Fire. It's 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 answers from you. Are you ready?
Ready.
So, I know you talked about it earlier because you were mentioning some of the great guys you worked with, but funniest colleagues you ever worked with. You can add them and you can add other guys in there too.
There are some funny dudes, man. Bobby Milmore, who I worked with in Rescue 3 and, was, a veteran also, and had seen bad things in life before. And so, although a very good firefighter, he didn't take a lot of stuff that seriously. So I just thought he was just funny every day. And I'm not sure other guys appreciated his humor as much as I did, but I thought so. I'll bring up Sam Malisi. Sam and I worked with Ray Meisenheimer, who from Rescue 3, God rest his soul, was murdered on September 11th. Ray was a large guy, and he had this big head, and we called him Buffalo Head because his head looked like a buffalo head. And so he was always trying to lose weight. He was always trying to maintain, a certain size or whatever. And he would skip dinner. He'd be like, yeah, no, I'm trying to lose weight. I can't eat that. But then in the middle of the night, we would catch him in the refrigerator. So one night while he went to bed, Sam, who was a very talented guy, he cut metal out and welded them on these metal sticks. And it was, he cut out buffalo footprint out of metal, and he dipped it in the rescue blue paint, and he made hoof prints down the stairs in blue paint, by the apparatus, into the back room where the kitchen was, and then up onto the refrigerator where the handle of the refrigerator is. So it would be like Buffalo Head would sneak in the middle of the night, and there would be all these hoof prints. And so when he woke up the next morning, the guy, I think he was going to have a heart attack. He laughed so hard that that we were teasing him, but he understood, he understood the joke, and those hoof prints stayed there for months and months. It was very funny. And we made fun of Buffalo Head, but I'll tell you what, you need a guy to take a wall down. That was the guy.
And it's not done maliciously. It's done out of love.
No.
The concern is if they don't bust your chops. If they're not busting your chops, then you're in trouble. So I know this is very hard to imagine, but let's say, if it wasn't for firefighting, right? What other career could you have seen yourself doing and enjoying?
If I couldn't be a firefighter, I would have been a buff, and I would have figured out how to make a career out of being involved in the fire service, which I still like to do, like being innovative and being entrepreneurial with things. My younger brother, Chris, who's a retired Providence firefighter, and I started the Bravest.com back in the 90s. And we were the first ones to put the New York City Fire Department radio on the internet. Long before any of these other guys did it. We did it for fun so that we could listen, and so that other people could listen anywhere in the world. We figured out how to do it. So things like that, I've still been involved around the fire service, around emergencies, things like that.
That's what I do. I mean, sometimes I'll walk in with my headphones around the house and my mom will ask me, what do you listen to, a podcast? No. Music? No. What? The scanner.
Yeah.
Because there's apps now. I want to hear the NYPD scanner, the FDNY scanner. I think I read a story about Patty Brown, when he would listen to the radio, same thing. He'd take his bike and he'd ride out to these fires as close as he could get, and as I said earlier, I'm a buff too, so no shame in that.
No,
so
none here.
Yeah, absolutely not. So third, I mean, you mentioned the war years earlier. There have been some incredible eras to be a fireman in New York City's history. If you could work during any of those eras, what era would you pick?
Probably around the Patty Brown, Terry Hatton era, maybe a little bit earlier. They were around 78. So maybe a little bit earlier, maybe 75 or something like that. But, you have to be careful what you ask for, because you also didn't have the masks then. So, a lot of those guys are dead from cancer. So, in the end, I was right where I was supposed to be. My life, as Father Michael Judge would say, your life is exactly what God wanted your life to be. And that's it. So I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And speaking with you right now is exactly where God wants me to be. So.
Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
O'Hara's at Ground Zero. That is my cheers. That's where, because it's loaded with all patches of police and fire and military and flags and pins, and it's our kind of people who frequent that place. My favorite restaurant is Patsy's on 2nd Avenue. I'm in there every night, and my friend owns it, and they have excellent food at reasonable price.
I got to check it out next time I'm in the city. So fifth and finally, I don't get mad at me to my police friends. I originally wanted to be a fireman. I know cops like to joke. We don't talk about firemen, but before my health got in the way, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, cops are cops because they failed the fireman's test. So.
I've heard that one too. I think I heard that from Bob Gallione on a different show. It's like, I was actually, quick aside on that, because at ESU, and I don't know how I imagine it's better now. Back then, ESU and the rescue units would go toe to toe, because same training and whatnot, as I've covered on the show before. And there's an E-cop, and next to one of the rescue guys, and the rescue guy turns to him and says, "So," and E-cop says, "Yeah. How much did you fail the fireman's test by?"
Yeah.
In the middle of like a car altercation. So it's funny you mentioned that. Let's say I was coming on the job, right? I'm in the academy. I'm trying to get on the job. What would you tell me?
I'd tell you what we talked about earlier first. I would say what Patty Brown said. You can do everything in this job right and still get killed. However, give yourself the best chance at not being killed. Study, train, drill, get experience, listen to the senior men, get promoted if you want to get promoted, but learn the job. It will be your best friend. It will be, you will have a career full of laughs that you get paid for. You'll get paid to have the most fun in your life. You won't get rich, but your family will be stable. Your family will be proud of you. Your children will look up to you. And even after all of this, it's still the greatest job on earth.
The greatest show on earth, in the greatest city on earth, too.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
All
of the above. All of the above.
Tim, this has been an absolute honor.
Thank you, Mike.
I'm glad
to meet you. Can you find me when you come to New York?
Sure. Let me know. Let me know.
Great. I'll buy you a beer at O'Hara's or something.
Yeah, and I just hit 21, so I can drink now.
Perfect.
There you go. So, yeah, absolutely. You got it, my friend. You have my number, so give me a ring anytime.
Yes,
Before
sir.
we go, if there's any shout outs you'd like to give to anyone or anything, you have the floor.
I'm a charity guy, as we are, right? So I would like to give a shout out to Frank Siller from the Stephen Siller Tunnel to Towers Foundation and the entire Siller family and all those who work for the Siller Foundation because of the amazing work they do for America's heroes, the military, police, and fire. Give $11 a month to the Stephen Siller Tunnel to Towers Foundation, and 94% of that money goes to the end user, which are Gold Star families, line of duty families, disabled military who need special homes built for them. It's what America should be doing. So volunteer with the Siller Foundation, do fundraising for them, give $11 a month to this incredible charity.
Absolutely. And I'll link their foundation in the description of this podcast. On my end, of course, if you don't know where to find me on social media, for all you listening for the first time, I'm on Twitter at Mike in New Haven, where you can find my musings about the Yankees and my disappointment in them, amongst other things. Instagram original _ MC1, LinkedIn Mike Colón, and then type in Mike after you type in my name, because there's a lot of Mike Colóns out there, so I'm not the only one. MIC_D, and you can connect with me. I'd be happy to have you. So coming up on the Mike in New Haven podcast, she emigrated from Israel after a stint in the Army in 2007 with the BA in counterterrorism, and she ran the NYPD social media accounts for a while. That is Yael Valtour, and she will be joining me on the program, so we'll be happy to have her. Next week will be retired NYPD homicide detective Al Titus, and November 9th, the police bureau chief for the New York Daily News, and an author too, Rocco, Paris Gondolas. So some exciting shows in the works. And in the meantime, on behalf of Tim Brown, this has been, again, one heck of a podcast, volume 7 of the Best of the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. I am Mike Colón. We will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.